Here we go again. Hello everyone, I'm Robin, listing special Ludi. And we are currently in the year 2023. We've been in this year in a while actually. 2022 ended up over 2 months ago. And in 2022 I ended up playing a few video games, which I may or may not have liked. And exactly like I did with the previous year, I am interested in sharing this with all you good people on the internet who give me the great honor of having my videos watched. And just like before, I've made myself a bit of a tier list on Tier Maker, and I've put all the games that I started in 2022 and not necessarily finished, but at least played a solid amount of in that year. And I'm going to tell you what I think about each and every one of those. I'm going to plug them into one of 4 categories. Now the categories are different from last year. The reason is I only played really good games, really, this year. Almost. And so we got 3 categories, which, as you can see, are all real positive. And this one, which, could count as B tier, I'm probably going to refer to it as B tier during this video, is made of games which I consider to be good / very good. Let's say maybe solidly good. As in, they're really well made, usually have fine gameplay, good physics, good premises, and certainly keep you interested all the way. But to me, they didn't quite exactly feel like they fit me. They didn't catch as much interest from me as I feel they should have or the developers wanted. So, B+, if you want. Then I've got what I put as great experiences, those are just good games all around, but I could feel that something was missing in terms of being really amazing for me, for Robin. And then we got S tier, real standouts. Those are games which are just incredible, fantastic, really cream of the crop, and will stand the test of time, in my opinion, at the very least. Stand the test of time of the opinion I have of them and the importance they will have to me. Though this category has fewer entries, as you will see. And then you've got that, which are games which are best left alone and not really played anymore. Whew. So what games do we have? Let's have a quick list before I just start sorting them. That's the list essentially in chronological order, what I played from January to December. Dead Cells, played that on video. Shadow Complex Remastered, not quite visible, but it says Remastered at the bottom. Also played that on video. Then Deltarune Chapter 2. So that's the sequel to Deltarune Chapter 1. I consider that to be its own game, at least for the purpose of increasing the amount of content of this video. I feel this is certainly worth being in there. But it is part of what will be one game itself, which will be Deltarune. But we're not there yet, possibly at all. Gato Roboto, also on camera, on video. Elden Ring, that won a very famous Game of the Year title at the Game Awards recently, so very important. Omori, it came out on Switch. It was available on PC before, but I played it on Switch. An Untitled Story, finished that game 2 days ago, but that's fine because I started it in 2022. Final Fantasy VII Remake, Intergrade, to be very specific. Another game which existed on other platforms before but just came out on PC this summer, so I played that. Dark Souls 3. I played that as a consequence of playing Elden Ring. Stray, also known as the cat game, but more about that later. It's funny how we go from rather big budget games to tiny things. Here's Shotgun King, the final Checkmate. A really small indie game made by 2 people, I think. Sid Meier's Civilization 6, jumping all the way back up in terms of fame and scale. That's That is one huge game, and it's been out for actually 6 years. And then Blossom Tales, The Sleeping King. Again, it's almost like I'm alternating between tiny indie and big budget games. But it shows that World of Games has many things for many people. In fact, in terms of this difference, probably the switch from an Untitled Story to Final Fantasy VII Remake is probably the biggest one. And that's great. That is great. The world of gaming is varied and has loads of interesting things. Before we jump in and actually talk about each of those, you might want to put some background music for yourself. This video is likely not going to be short. In fact, we're already almost at 6 minutes. So consider that. And let's talk about Dead Cells. Hello, Dead Cells. You don't go anywhere yet. So, Dead Cells, I'm going to give a bit of a description of every game as well before saying what I thought. So, Dead Cells, I would describe it as an action platformer roguelike. So, you go through levels and fight enemies and beat bosses, and it's roguelike because you're supposed to die and keep trying and get a bit stronger every time. And it claims to have a Metroidvania influence, but at least, it's a reputation it has online. I don't feel this at all. This influence is really way overblown. You happen to unlock new abilities as you play the game, and they open new paths, but it's really more of various paths opening up in your roguelike experience. And they're not really used for exploration like it's done in proper Metroidvanias. So I remember at that time I was looking for a Metroidvania to play, and I ended up with a roguelike, which wasn't exactly what I wanted. But beyond that, this game, I didn't like it as much as you may think I did. Despite giving it 30 or so videos and finishing the hardest difficulty, the combat didn't quite mesh with me. I was never quite a big fan of either the system where you get kind of warned that an attack is coming and you have to dodge, or the shields, green weapons in general. They did not click with me at all. I never parried a single thing, probably tried 3 times and then gave up. And unlike other games, like Elden Ring, where I didn't parry at all, that's fine. In here, it really felt like it was cutting out some important content from me. And kind of related to that, I felt there's too much item variety in any single run. So you're given too many items to pick from, and the result is that you really are going to focus on the ones you know the best and are the most comfortable with, and won't kind of take the risks of trying out something new and unusual. In particular, because the game is kind of strangely punishing. And to be fair, that may be because I zoom forward and focus on the highest difficulty, which is something I just do naturally. Unfortunately, that's who I am. But if you get hit, it's very punishing to get hit. You really do not want to get hit. Flask refills in the hardest difficulties are extremely rare. But the result is, if you saw my final run, you'll remember I was playing pure purple using 2 bows, one for short range, one for long range. Never really wanting to use any other weapon because they never felt as good as my 2 short and long range bows. And yeah, it didn't quite work out for me. I prefer a game which restricts what's available to you more, so that you just learn more things. Something like Binding of Isaac, where there's always the one item in the item room, with exceptions, of course. And then there's a shop on each floor, but you would need to pay money to get the shop. And again, even in the shops, the variety isn't as much as all the items you end up being given in Dead Cells. Also, way too many things to unlock. So yeah, Dead Cells. Okay, this is going to be a theme in this video. You're going to hear me say many things about why I don't like a game, and then I'm going to say that I still like it anyway. Dead Cells is good. I have some good memories from it, but it has a few things that just don't don't quite work. And that's not enough to drop it into not quite for me territory, but it's still good. In fact, yeah, this B+ tier may kind of feel like a not quite for me territory. And I might as well use this moment to emphasize this list is very personal. You can disagree with anything I say, that's fine. And you know, a lot of it is more about how the games made me feel than objective evaluation. Though, even though I say that, I'm someone who tries and kind of, at the very least, I try and ground any opinion I have on fact, even when it's about my own feelings. Feelings are based on facts. Take that, Ben Shapiro. And so you're gonna hear, you know, detailed arguments of things. In particular, I pay attention to a lot of silly details sometimes. We'll see how that goes. Next is Shadow Complex. And if you've seen my video series, I think you'll know that it deserves to be here. This is not a very good game, unlike all of those. It's not terrible, but it really doesn't have anything which makes it worth playing today. It suffers a lot from its history, or rather from gaming history. This game tried to be a Metroidvania before the great Metroidvania revival of, I guess, the early mid-2010s, up to, you know, Guacamelee, Hollow Knight, and things like that. And it does a few things which I feel are a bit weird and don't quite work out. So, for example, it directs you way too much. You don't have enough freedom for what we want from a Metroidvania. So it's a good time for me to say what a Metroidvania is. And to be fair, there's no actual definition. But you know, this is a game which is presented as a 2D action platformer. So you run around left and right and can jump and shoot at things. But your progress is not focused on stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, but instead you have a big interconnected map, and then you find keys or items which let you open up the map progressively as you play. This game has that, but it kind of tells you, go there, then go there, then go there. And it ends up feeling very generic because of that. You don't get this kind of interesting feeling of exploration. Now, that doesn't mean there's nothing to explore, but it never feels important or rewarding enough. So it doesn't quite work. You could disable also the arrows telling you where to go, and I wish I had done that before the end game, but I think it still doesn't quite work. In terms of actual gameplay mechanics, I wasn't a fan of the combat, the shooting, the controls in general, or the balance between your health, enemy health, boss health. I played on, I guess, normal mode, and most of the time things were too easy, except when it was a bit hard for no reason. Things like that, not particularly satisfying to play. And you know how I said exploring doesn't quite feel rewarding? Sometimes it does. Sometimes you unlock some clearly upgrades which are a bit secret. But then the game does a horrible thing, which is when you reach the proper end of the game, it blocks out entire sections of the map where there are some important upgrades which will let you have the alternate ending. So this happened on my video series, where we reached the proper end game with the final boss available, but then I wanted to explore some section on the east of the map which was not accessible anymore. I tried, I looked around, online forums, people finding things. I did not. That was really disappointing. That was really disappointing. And all in all, this means that Shadow Complex, remastered or not, is not worth playing. I would not recommend this to anyone. Bye-bye, Shadow Complex. But I guess, you know, it's a history lesson. We at least got a history lesson out of that. All right, good. Next, we got Deltarune Chapter 2. Now, this game is essentially what you would expect. It really, you know, it's your classic Toby Fox RPG. If you've played Undertale, you have a pretty good understanding of what Deltarune Chapters 1 and 2 are. And, you know, maybe I should explain. So what is a JRPG? That is a bit hard to explain, but you have essentially a top-down view, so you can walk up or down, left or right, and you move around and talk to people and adventure and go through interesting environments and meet interesting people. And then combat is, let's say, more or less menu-based. More or less menu-based. And this game does it in Toby Fox style, which means fun story, interesting, very, very whimsical, a lot of whimsy, of course, characters and writing. Actually, also a lot of good emotion, and just feels good the whole way. I mostly played Deltarune Chapter 2 throughout one very long train ride, and it was great. It was great. In fact, it was so great that when I finished it, I seriously considered replaying it almost instantly to unlock a few things that I had missed and that I was interested in. So yeah, really good game. I would say a bit better than Chapter 1, just because I liked the story and the characters a bit more. Obviously, it's a sequel to Chapter 1, which means some of the things that happened in Chapter 1 kind of got... reached more interesting points. We got new characters, new music, and what's his name? Birdley. Birdley is silly and fun. Queen is great. Queen is great. I need to replay this game. But Queen and Birdley is great. And music is fantastic as ever. Standard Toby Fox style. This is not a music analysis, but we got some proper good music in there. I don't really have anything bad to say about this game. I'll put it here. It's borderline real standout, but I would leave that one to specifically Undertale, which was just really, especially at the time, really special. It's a wonderful game. Maybe, it will come together even more when chapters 3, 4, 5 come out. And I'm really looking forward to those. Maybe I should replay... No, I guess I will replay Chapter 2 when Chapter 3 comes out. Just like I replayed Chapter 1 when Chapter 2 came out. That makes a lot of sense. Wonderful game. So, important to make a difference, I guess. So I would put Deltarune at the top of this tier and Dead Cells at the bottom of this tier. So we're going to put loads of games between those, hopefully. Just because Dead Cells is more on the objectively good, but something didn't quite work out for me. And I'm messing my hair up. That's fine. Okay. Gato Roboto. This one. So it's another Metroidvania. Much more modern than Shadow Complex. This game does not feel old. And what I'll say about Gato Roboto is it works. The whole environment, the whole black and white setting, the whole I'm a cat in a big Metroid armor. It all works. But the game itself is a bit simple and shallow. It doesn't have that much special going for it. And that works out mostly fine because the game is pretty short, short and sweet kind of deal. But for me, it didn't exactly end up feeling properly satisfying. In fact, I'd say I had a few issues with movement and combat where it just felt a bit clunky at times. And that's really all I have to say about this game. A bit shallow. This is kind of a big deal, I guess. I would recommend this to anyone who's interested in gaming, but maybe would feel a little bit overwhelmed by rich and complex games. Then it would work really well. So this gets a high B tier because it works, it's well made, but a bit clunky and not so interesting as far as me is concerned. This is a very personal tier list. I've said this before. It deserves emphasis. Okay, we're 4 out of, I think, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 13. Getting our way through this. Next is Elden Ring. Elden Ring, oh Elden Ring. Yeah. So let me first start by doing this. So, some games I declare the score and then talk about them. Some games I talk about them first and then declare the score, as you've seen. But Elden Ring is so good. Such a good video game. It goes beyond what I can say with words. Luckily, I took notes, so I do have loads of things to actually say with words. So, actually, let's start to try and describe what this game is. It's, at its core, it's an action game, 3D action game where you move around in your 3D environment, run around, jump just a bit, and attack things with whatever you want. But it's mechanically, yes, it's an action game. So you attack, you have 5 or so different melee attacks, jump attacks, shield parries, and things like that. But that's one bit. The other bit is your character is built like an RPG, so you can level up, increasing your various stats, HP, strength, intelligence, and so on, and you get 1,000 different items that you can equip, different armors, different talismans, and things like that, and you get magic spells that you can use as well. And the third aspect, well, so those two things are what usually makes Souls games, Dark Souls games. If you add the whole lose currency on death and then pick it up. But the third important thing about Elden Ring is that it's open world, which means you have almost complete freedom to go anywhere you want right from the start. And with that, I think that kind of puts down 3 basic things. I guess to the middle, the second bit, the RPG bit, you could add, it has a rather rich world with many characters, very, very in-depth backstory. Hardly any actual story, but that's something which works really well with the open world setting. The actual story is you go in a kingdom, you kill everyone, and then become Lord. That's, well, not kill everyone who'd be interested in ruling, and then you become Lord. That's literally the story. But what's actually interesting is the stories of all those everyones that you kill, why they need to be killed, and so on. But, so, why is this game so good? The open world nature of it. From Software, the studio who made this, they managed to nail the wonder of exploration, which is something that any Metroidvania or open world game needs to just, I don't know, grab a player's soul. So essentially what happens is all the time you're going to wonder, what's over there? What's over there? And what's over there? Where should I go? I wonder if there's something interesting down there. And so on. And it just keeps coming. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. And it's always interesting enough that you feel that you want to explore some more and find some more. I haven't played that many actual open world games, technical meaning, but I have played Breath of the Wild, which also does that really well. And yeah, I got seriously into Breath of the Wild the first time I played it. In fact, even both times. Elden Ring, unfortunately, kind of loses some of that the first time you beat it. But there's still so much incredible things which are not just the pure exploration that you can keep coming back to it. So what else is amazing? So it has the open world, but it also has more traditional dungeons, which are really in the more classical style. And those, especially something like Leyndell and Stormveil Castle, they are incredibly well designed, so good. It's difficult, but you progress bit by bit, and when you conquer the whole thing, you just feel like you've accomplished so much. This game is really difficult, but when you get through every single obstacle, you feel you've earned it. It's very satisfying. All right, what other things I want to say about how high level everything is? The variety of what you can do. You can build your character completely differently with, you can build standard melee, you got various classes of spells you can specialize in, you can focus on bows if you want. That would be mostly for the challenge. Can be melee with heavy defense or melee with hardly any defense but really agile and with fast rolls and so on. Shields or no shields. Do you parry when you use shields? In which case you'd rather use a smaller one and things like that. It just goes on and on and on and on. I've consumed loads of YouTube content of people playing the game in interesting ways. There is so much to be done. There is so much to be done. Now, it doesn't mean it's perfect. I have actually loads of criticism for Elden Ring, but somehow none of it even manages to make a dent into the incredible love I have for this game. Still, let me list you a few things which just aren't great. The first is that a few of the bosses and enemies are just actually bad. Like the giant crayfish are just stupid. Even though they create a good sensation of dread, they're just way too strong and it's annoying. A few of the bosses also kind of feel bad. That's a little bit disappointing, unfortunately. But nothing terrible. One thing which bothers me a lot, and apparently no one else almost, is the upgrade system. So essentially you need to spend quite a lot of semi-rare items and currency to upgrade your weapons, which means that whenever you upgrade a weapon, you kind of commit to it. There's a decent amount of commitment. And if you're a new player and are a bit unsure of what you're doing, you're going to get a huge fear of just wasting your money, your experience, your runes, and your smithing stones into upgrading an item, a weapon that you won't actually like. And this creates, there's a huge tendency to just stay with what you have and not go with the fun of experimenting with many weapons. And I don't know how they could fix that. And that bothers me as well. But there must be a way of improving the upgrade system, which would end up being friendlier to new players. Because, let's be honest, this game is not very friendly to new players. It's very difficult, and it's also very obscure. The game doesn't tell you quite enough about its mechanics and so on. There's a tutorial at the start, but somehow I think maybe all the enemies inside the tutorial are too easy that you don't end up learning the proper lessons. And I would honestly recommend for everyone to try this game. It's not actually as hard as you may think it is, because it has a few mechanics embedded into it which make it doable. Notably, I mean spirit summoning. Spirit summoning is great, kind of turns on easy mode for most of the bosses, but you know what, considering the baseline is super hard, turning on easy mode is fine, completely fine. I did the playthrough with spirit summons, my first one, and I'm glad I did, because difficult game. Also, another annoying thing is that you really need a wiki if you want to uncover most of the secrets, because it's let's be honest, some of this is because humans suck, but if you don't use a wiki, you're going to miss out on loads of secrets and optional items and fun things. That doesn't feel good. However, not using a wiki and letting yourself fall into this open world to explore is great if you're able to let go. I would recommend that people let go, but especially if you're finding things hard, have a friend around who knows the game, who can tell you, a few bits of help to help you get along if you get stuck. I can volunteer. I'm happy to volunteer and get people to enjoy this game as much as they could, because it's so good. In fact, I want to replay it right now. Wait, I've said this for Deltarune already. That's a problem. Anyway, I can't even recommend every person play Hollow Knight, but I can recommend that everyone plays Elden Ring, even though Elden Ring is definitely harder. This is interesting. You're gonna be punished a bit, but persevere. you're gonna get some completely unique emotions out of this game with this combination of exploration, satisfying combat. It's great. It's great. But enough about Elden Ring. Let's talk about Omori here. Omori. So this is a JRPG. So kind of like Deltarune, kind of like Mr. Deltarune here. But in fact, it's more similar than you think, because it's part of this kind of wider subgenre of JRPGs, which essentially started with Earthbound, the Mother series, where they focus a bit less on the strength of the gameplay, of the RPG-ness, you know, the how to make your menu-based combat as interesting as possible, which can be done. Some of them do it really well. And more on the world you're exploring, the world you're in, the characters you meet. Oh yeah, the quests in Elden Ring are terrible. Use a wiki. Back on topic. So Mori, the characters, the environments, the emotions, really important emotions in Omori. And so Omori is inspired by this whole series. So this whole series starts with Earthbound Mother, also has Undertale, anything by Toby Fox, and there's a few others which don't quite come to mind right now. And Omori, it ends up going somewhere extremely personal. Extremely personal. It has a very powerful setting, very powerful story, characters, and emotion. Emotion so strong. This game jumps from insane dream world whimsy, where like inside a dream world there's a space pirate who's in love with a pop singer, and you need to reunite them, and then she's really mean, so she dumps him anyway. It's so silly. And then you've got the real darkness, actual fear and creepy things. There's a creature in the game which is called something in all capitals, and the game may be designed in a kind of cutesy style, but damn, something can be really scary. I've had nights, you know, going to bed a little bit late, and then I just think of Omori and this something creature, and like, yeah, I don't feel quite comfortable now. I'm not gonna spoil the story at all, but it's a heartbreak. It's a really, really big heartbreaker. Again, really powerful. Soundtrack. Haven't talked much about music yet, but except Deltarune, makes sense. But soundtrack for Omori is very good. I'd say it's the kind of music, the kind of soundtrack that I would like to write, because it has a very appreciable, in some sense, quality. Is that nothing in it hits you like it's a work of genius, but the whole thing is really well made and well put together, with various themes coming back at different times, with different rearrangements for drama or emotion and so on. And the fact that it's well built like that contributes to all the emotional power the game really needs. And you know, gameplay wise, it's good, fine, but nothing amazing. Some of the dungeons get a bit grindy. Definitely some of the dungeons or some of the battles can get grindy. But again, that's not the point. The point of Omori is the emotion, the good and the bad, the dark. It's inspired not just by Earthbound, also by Yumeniki, which is a game I've never played, but I think goes into the creepiness that you can express with the JRPG format. All right, all this to say that I love Omori. I love Omori. This is a bit, so I've watched a speedrun of Omori this summer, and I think that just saying I love Omori really loud is a bit of a meme. It's a fine meme. It's a fine meme. Absolutely. Whew. Can't say I recommend this to everyone, but I love it. I'll just say that. All right, next, an Untitled Story, which I finished 2 days ago. We're back towards Metroidvanias. This one really just plonks you in a big world and tells you, well, basically win the game, find the answer. First tells you nothing, eventually you kind of get it, that you need to actually escape this world and so on, but it's really all up to you to find it by exploring. It has some open world tendencies compared to Metroidvania, but it's very much gated by you finding skills which open up sections of the map, and that's what makes it the Metroidvania. Compared to, you know, all of the other ones here, well, no, compared to Gato, Roboto, and Shadow Complex, it's very focused on the platforming more than the actual combat. In fact, most of the bosses are fought by just jumping on them rather than shooting. So you can shoot, but it's not the core aspect of gameplay. Most of the gameplay, most of the traversal is on the precision platforming type of thing. Now, this game is made by a single person who was a bit of a budding developer at the time. I've said this too many times in my videos, and that's fine. But that means it has a little bit of a unique atmosphere, again with interesting whimsy. But it really works really well, and it manages to capture this feeling that I've been talking about, this feeling of, I wonder what's over there. So, you know, you might enter a new area and you go from left to right, and then even though you're going from left to right, you can see there's 3 paths, one going up, one going right, one going down. The 3 will lead you to different areas, like climbing the mountain, down in the caverns, or go in the water area, something like that. And you just want to look at all of this and see what's going there. And when it works so well. And it works in an Untitled Story. Now, it's not a perfect game by any means. I'd say it's a bit rough around the edges. The bosses are a bit repetitive. Gameplay may be a bit too focused on really precise platforming. And the music, the developer isn't exactly a musician, let's say that. But still interesting, and you get this kind of united, this feeling of unity that is really made by a single person. You can see that, but I insist, this game gets it right in terms of making exploration work and feel good, and that completely justifies it going in the A category. It's not S, it's a bit rough around the edges, as I said, but if it had some kind of modernized remake, it could totally be a bit higher. Maybe still not S, I guess. You know, S really, like what I mean S, this rank, really needs to be incredibly special. Like even Deltarune Chapter 2. But today, for this tier list, this high level tier list where all the games are good except Shadow Complex, only for now, those 2 are at the top. But yeah, Untitled Story, wonderful. I actually would recommend this to most people. Just don't play on difficult, because it really does get difficult. But yeah, delightful little game. Next, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Intergrade. I don't like the word Intergrade, but this is like the version like version 1.5 of the whole thing. So, how about this one? I just plonk it right here. Nope, here. Ha! Less enjoyed than an Untitled Story. Now, don't get me wrong, this is really an excellent game. Well, this is really a powerful game. I didn't like everything in it, but it's certainly an interesting one. So as a remake, you know, you may say it gets judged differently than any other game in this list, and you may be wrong. So, I mean, Shadow Complex was remastered, but I had never played the original. This one is a remake of Final Fantasy VII, which is a game with history and, you could say, cultural significance within the world of video games. I think the most important thing about it that I like is the world and characters. So we've got this world and all those characters that some of us know from our childhood and love. And I played Final Fantasy VII when I was 10ish, and I was a very impressionable young child back then. And I just loved the whole experience all the way through. I played it on PC. My PC didn't meet the standard requirements, so occasionally the game would lag and go to 10% speed. It was a bit of a struggle, but eventually I did beat it. Upgrading the PC worked. Certainly it helped with a few sections. And of course there was all this legendary music and so on. My sister was responsible for naming the characters, and she used her favorite boys band from the time. It was something. It was certainly something. Cloud was called Frank. Anyway, so it felt really good to get all these characters that I know, this world I recognize, appear in a modern, really modernized game, looking better than they've ever done. 3D, incredible amounts of details. The characters, they got updated models and they look great. Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, Barrett. Let me insist on Barrett. He didn't look great in Advent Children, but he looks really good in Remake. Barrett looks really good, and his actual character I also loved. You've got this guy who is weirdly incredibly passionate about the cause he's working for. This cause being the whole environmentalism thing, or rather environmental terrorism. And he's so passionate. He overdoes it. And maybe he himself knows it. Certainly everyone around him knows it. But yeah, he has some awareness. But it's really fun to see him really get into his speeches and see all the other characters around him react their own ways. And, to contrast with this, you have Tifa, who agrees with the cause, but isn't really sure that they should be going that far terrorism-wise. Now, of course, there's the rather complicated plot behind this. Well, not complicated, but reasonably in-depth, where, in fact, most of the bombings were made much worse because not of our group, but because of the evil corporation behind all things, who wants to put us environmental terrorists as scapegoats. But that's the story. Mostly the same story of the original, changed a bit. We're going to get that we're going to get into that in a bit. Let me talk more still about the world and characters. So I played with Japanese voice acting because I have the luxury of understanding some of it, and I thought the voice acting was great. And again, like Barrett, but characters in general. I really like Cloud. They all got their personalities. So Cloud has this inner turmoil, which really gets up to 11 in this remake, even compared to the original. I think they may have overdone it in terms of having Sephiroth appear everywhere. I kind of liked how in the original he was hidden away. As much as the game could, they were pushing Sephiroth away and not revealing him. Here, he's just kind of in your face, which is a little bit too much. And Tifa, I talked about Tifa already. And then you have Aerith, who's really cheeky, flirty, and fun. And yet has her deep mission, of course. It's all really great on this side of things. In fact, the whole presentation of the game is incredible. I usually don't care much about the graphics, but something about re-seeing Final Fantasy VII in this much detail just felt great. And not just graphical detail, all the voices, the way you can walk around and you'll see many scenes of the world happening around you. There was one scene which really struck me, was a Shinra soldier talking to a random house lady who was saying something about the war, maybe her son fought in the war, something like that, and made the world feel alive. And that was so good. That was so good. The story itself is mostly the same as the original, with a few changes. I mentioned Sephiroth appearing more in Cloud's semi-hallucinations, but they changed a few things, especially towards the end. It got pretty strange. It gets pretty strange, and I wasn't quite convinced about the weird ghosts appearing, but at the end I felt, yes, it's weird, but it works just enough for me to be okay with it. And also it leaves more freedom for the sequels of what is actually the first chapter of a remake to diverge even more from the original. So we're going to see where it expands from that. So yeah, I really liked the world and the presentation, but doesn't mean I liked everything about the game. I have some qualms, and this is why it's not S. It's just in the middle of the A tier. I ended up not really liking the whole combat. You know, combat is a huge part of games. And even like compared to things like Omori, where I wasn't a fan of combat, but it was fine, here there was something which didn't feel quite great about it. It tries to be a mix between action game and menu-based combat, and I thought that just didn't work. It felt spammy and cluttered. Like, even when you're not in a menu and you're mostly controlling like an action game, there's lots of things happening on the screen. It's not quite clear what you can dodge, what you can't dodge. The whole thing is a little bit cluttered and ends up confusing, and you mostly end up spamming your good moves and hoping the enemy dies, which usually they will. It's not a hard game unless you play on the hardest mode, or it does get hard on occasion for some fights, and actually that is certainly a commendable trait. You don't get your hand held that much. But compared to Elden Ring, which its combat is action game, no menus, complicated button combinations depending on what the thing you want to access, but isn't in your shortcuts, but still, it's an action game. And in Elden Ring, everything is quite precise. Some of the bosses are bad, some of the hitboxes don't quite align with what it looks like. Some bosses read your input a bit too well, too fast, and it's a bit frustrating. But overall, it's a precise and accurate game. Meanwhile, FF7 Remake is a bit, well, let's just attack, and then when I can't do it, I'll unleash my Thunder Spell. And that never quite pleased me as much as it should. And which is why I didn't even go for like optional boss fights too much, besides the basic summons that the game gives you. So that's one problem with FF7 Remake. Combat, for me, again, I know friends who really like the combat, but for me it's in terms of the game's general content, the game felt very, 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 very padded and a bit slow. Like, clearly they wanted to expand on the original, give the world more life, more content, more things, more characters, and to some extent that's commendable. They expanded the opening chapter, which I guess is 8-ish hours, maybe 10, or less if you know what you're doing, to triple that. And that was too much. It's hard to explain. It actually is hard to explain. You know, you still have a story with the beginning and a climax and all that, but by the end it felt too much, and I just wanted it. I wanted it to be over. Now, in terms of this padding, so they've given more stuff, and a lot of it, you know, feels a bit unnecessary. There are some scenes which are really useless. So before, I guess, the final chapter-ish, before you go to Shinra Tower, there's a whole sub-quest about a character who was in another game, who no one really cares about, but he has the key, the item which lets you climb the wall, so you need to solve his personal story. It's too much. Go through the sewers for the 5th time and so on. Just too much. But some of the padding, I was kind of okay with, ish. So there's one early chapter, 6, 7, 8, around those things, where the whole chapter is kind of a small dungeon where you are beneath one of the plates holding Midgar up, and you're just moving from point A to point B. But being beneath those plates, you get some interesting views, like, literal views, seeing interesting things about the world beneath you. And also, dialogue between the characters as you're exploring the dungeon. It ends up working well for world building. Gameplay-wise, really boring chapter. But world building-wise, I respected that it did something. It wasn't perfect, but it did something, and that was good. And again, on the bad side of the padding, there's one puzzle, if you played the game you'll remember, where it's like you're using a mechanical hand to transport characters from one place to another. It's mind-numbingly easy and boring and tedious because you need to press buttons to load people, unload, move the hand. And it's really easy, obvious what you need to do, but it takes forever. Even though I appreciate that this hand was actually in the original from 1998. I think 8? Maybe earlier than 8. Anyway, it was from the original, maybe 6. Probably depends whether it's PS1 or PC. And they kind of did, hey, this is a funny item in the background. Let's give it more place, more space in the expanded game. Yes, but goddamn, that puzzle was boring. And similarly, I guess, it's a good time to say that the original, being a menu-based combat system, has loads of enemies with kind of fun design, but you kill them all by just clicking attack twice. Not fascinating, works, you can see the fun design, but doesn't go much beyond that. They really tried to make this better in the remake, so you get loads of enemies returning. It's actually a good nostalgic feeling to see this random weird monster part of the fully realized world. But now they all have their slightly complicated mechanics around attack with this thing first, or that element first, or avoid this and don't avoid that, and so on, which is just a bit tedious. Some of the combat is a bit tedious, yes. Ugh. But back on topic of padding, the game being too big, they do this thing around 3 times in the game, where the game kind of stops-ish and tells you, okay, you can now go on side quests if you want. And if you don't want, you can mostly skip ahead, and then you'll lose the ability to do the side quests, of course. And so I see this as some kind of move trying to copy what the other developer, Nihon Falcom, does with the Trails series of games. Trails in the Sky, Trails of Cold Steel, if you've heard of those. And those games are defined by their world building. They're placed in one giant, incredible world with loads and loads and loads and loads of factions and characters, and the whole thing ties together incredibly well. And FF7 Remake was trying to emulate that, but it doesn't quite work. They don't quite have the skill that Falcom has at making every tiny side character matter, and matter for our hearts as well. So like, in Trails, say Trails from Zero, where you're police agents, rookie police people going through in a city which is going through a serious turmoil, and you have early chapter where there's a side quest where you help someone with a random thing, and then 3 chapters later there's another side quest with that same person, and you see how they've grown. It just feels good. FF7, I can see they're trying to kind of copy this, emulate this, and it kind of worked, but not really. And again, feels a bit like bloat. So, bloat problem in FF7 Remake. And you know, this is not a special criticism. Other people have said that. Other things, other topics, music. Music in the original is, of course, quintessential. So good, so famous, such an important bit of many people's childhood. Here, it's remade wonderfully. It's all really good, really well done, really strong music. I feel it lacks something because, and that's going to be with, there's too much music. Video game music has this thing where you like listening to the same track over and over and over again, so it becomes part of you. In this remake, they've kind of had a thing where most tracks have loads of variants that you will hear in different situations, and you end up not being able to bond as well with single tracks because they just don't play as often. And it's a bit weird to say that, but the result is it doesn't feel as strong and impactful as the original did. Even though quality-wise, I cannot criticize any of the music. So yeah, strange form of disappointment. And my last criticism is that there are way too many secret laboratories where weird experiences are being held. What is wrong with this game? There's like, I don't want to spoil too much, but the only place where they could be any kind of scientific laboratory, turns out there's 3 and 2 are underground in the same area. It makes no sense. When I saw the third one, I was thinking, what is going on? And to be fair, I understand the third one is because it's a tie with, I think, Crisis Core, which I probably need to play as well. But it's just silly. It's just silly. The DLC is really good. The Yuffie story is really good. Yuffie is also a really fun character. Wonderful characters. Great world. Bit too much padding. Too long. Combat doesn't quite work. A tier on the slightly lower side. Whew. Next is Dark Souls 3. So, made by the same people who made Elden Ring. It doesn't go here. Well, maybe it does. You'll see in a bit. But much earlier, so that's like 2014, something like that. Maybe 2016. Maybe 2016. Maybe 2016, yes. It's Elden... Here's the description. It's Elden Ring, but you don't have an open world. You have level 1, then level 2, then level 3, then level 4. And that robs the game of half its magic. For me. It really made the whole experience just a bit blander. Less interesting, less exciting. It's not exactly a linear progression because you have a few levels kind of branching off to other levels. But mostly it's linear and you don't get that sense of wonder. So it's just not as good as Elden Ring just for that reason. No, mathematically, that shouldn't make that much of a difference because each level is still meticulously crafted and really well made and really pleasant and interesting. Good enemies to fight. There's still loads of exploration within the levels. You know, especially the dungeony ones will have lots of paths branching in weird ways and there's cycling back and so on. But I've played Elden Ring. It kind of, in some sense, ruins the enjoyment of other games. But I will say that I like Dark Souls 1 more than Dark Souls 3 because Dark Souls 1 is built more like a Metroidvania. So the world opens up as you discover more things. And turns out that's enough to give this feeling of wonder. Even though Dark Souls 1 is mechanically really clunky. Much less smooth than Dark Souls 3. So, interesting. And because of that, Dark Souls 3 just... I'll put it above an Untitled Story, below Deltarune, yes. And say those 3 I can't quite find. They're all in the middle of the A tier. This one is borderline. Now, besides that, I have other criticism of Dark Souls 3 though. They're not quite as important. The first is that it's a bit too easy. And I know that sounds silly, but these games, part of the appeal of these games is that they're difficult. And if they're not difficult, something's gonna feel like it's missing. And the easiness kind of contributed to the blandness of the whole thing, as you can just move on and, you know, nothing is particularly noticeable and lacks impact. That's the word. The easiness removes impact from the whole thing. In particular, like most bosses I beat on my first or second try. I wasn't super good, but turns out the bosses don't do that much damage and you always have plenty of opportunity to heal, so you'll be fine. I have a list of the bosses. The only bosses which kill me more than twice, if you know the game, are Pontiff Sullivan, who's a well-known kind of block, can be beaten with parrying, even though I didn't parry him. Dragon Slayer Armor, probably the hardest boss in the game for me was Dragon Slayer Armor. Nameless King, Sister Frieda, she's really good, and Dark Eater Meier, who was also really good, but a bit grindy, especially the path going back to him was hard. And all the other bosses in the game, they were just kind of there, kind of just blocking the way casually, but not this kind of intense feeling of this is a hard obstacle, I need to learn how to beat it. Learning the bosses, both in Dark Souls and Elden Ring, is one of the wondrous aspects of it feeling good, because you have something blocking your way and you grind against it a little bit, or possibly a lot. Elden Ring, I have some bosses I grinded for hours and hours and hours, but I beat them and I was happy. Here, like Slave Knight Gale, who's the ultimate last boss of the DLC, apparently this guy is super respected as one of the best bosses of all time. I believe that, but I beat him on my first try. Barely, it was tense, but I don't get to forge a core memory out of beating a boss on my first try, because I don't get this grind, this learning experience. This game doesn't make you learn its bosses, and that's a tragedy. I played with a kind of standard melee Black Knight sword build, which is, I think, is strong but shouldn't be broken on anything. And yeah, so some disappointment at Dark Souls 3, unfortunately. Also, the story is really way too obtuse. This whole idea of conveying things just through tiny paragraphs and lore is really confusing, especially when the story, the backstory of this game is really strange, with the world coming to an end and so on. And there's hardly any music. There's hardly any music. My voice is dying, I'm sorry. Most of the game, if you're in a generic area, there's no music. And then the bosses have music. But again, I beat them in two rounds, so I'll just forget the music instantly. This doesn't work. Well, I mean, actually, it's fine. Actually, okay, I'm complaining for nothing. The kind of tense gameplay you have during the regular areas works fine with not having any music. Elden Ring does have music, but it's mostly very backgroundy stuff, like kind of long chords and not actual melody or rhythm. And again, that's fine, not remarkable, but it's fine. So, A tier for Dark Souls 3. And 4 games left. Next we have Stray. Stray. That game got really famous because, as you can see with that picture and the name, it's a cat game. It really garnered a lot of attention because it's the cat game. Unfortunately, that was a bit of a red herring. It's kind of a cat game, but not really. So you play as a cat. There's a button whose only purpose is to meow, I think. But the game isn't really about the cat. And it's not about doing cat-like things most of the time. And that's a huge disappointment. Unplayable. F tier. No, not quite. But a bit. So what this game really is, you wouldn't know until you're like an hour in. It's more interactive storytelling than an actual game. The whole gameplay is rather simple and shallow, and is more about getting you to know a rather mysterious and interesting world. It's this kind of post-apocalyptic setting, whereas the normal humans, but instead robots, are living a human-style life. And most of the story ends up with us helping a specific set of robots who are more or less rebels against the status quo and want things to get better and so on. And we as a cat, we mostly want to escape this hellscape of a city and go back in outside the nature and find our family again. It ends up just not being fascinating. I'm in principle completely happy with pure story games, but the world, despite being interesting, there's nothing super special about it or about what happens, and anything you do ends up being a little bit shallow slash padded in terms of gameplayness, and so kind of a disappointment. Also, the writers, who have very big, who are really important in this kind of game, they end up committing what I would call two unforgivable sins right at the very end. I won't spoil them. Maybe I'll post them in the comments under long blank. But there's two unforgivable, as I consider those, silly unforgivable sins, which end up also semi-souring the whole experience. So Stray had loads of potential as the cat game, but not really, unfortunately, not really. So yeah, it's fine. In fact, I would recommend it again to people, either to people who are interested in the whole catness of it and the whole storytelling, or people who are not really gamers but curious about games, because I think it still shows the power of the video game medium in terms of storytelling. It still does that pretty well. No doubt about this. Okay, from big to small, here is Shotgun King, the final checkmate. This game, how to describe this? Well, how about just by saying what happens? You are the Black King in a game of chess, except you're actually alone against the white group, white army, and you're armed with a shotgun. So you don't capture pieces the regular way. You shoot at them with your shotgun, and the enemy pieces have various amounts of health, and depending on angle at which you shoot and so on, you will kill them more or less fast. And it ends up being a roguelike. So you kill all the white pieces, then you go to the next level, where it's a bit harder. You will get a bit of a buff, and the white pieces will also get a bit of a buff, and this continues for a while until you win, and then can restart with slightly different things, settings or difficulty or whatever. So it's a roguelike. And it's a damn fun one at that. It's pretty simple, not too ambitious, but it's really addictive. You just play it and want to play it again instantly, see what happens. It goes quite fast, and you end up developing a solid amount of strategy and technique. So every floor, as I said, I guess they're floors. Every time you clear the board of white pieces, or rather kill the white king, to be specific, you only need to kill the white king every time, you get a black card which buffs you and a white card which buffs the white pieces. You get a choice between a set of two sets of one black, one white. And there's a big variety of those. So you will end up seeing some wildly different games. And if you want to set some kind of weird conditions, you can do that as well. And a good amount of variety in an exciting, fun, overall delightful game. I will place it here. It's not as good as this kind of core mid-A tier, but I like it more than Dead Cells. And I essentially played as much as I want, but I'm gonna come back to it and grind the slightly harder modes from time to time, and I'll be happy with it. So, fun game, recommend it to many people if you can run it on your machine. I think it's not on Mac, unfortunately. Make a Mac version, please. Next, only 2 games left. And here we have Sid Meier's Civilization 6, aka Civ 6, if you're familiar. Or just Civ. We don't really say this. 6 isn't... 6 isn't relevant unless you play the older ones, which some people do. Not me, as this is my first Civilization game. Okay. I have a very toxic love-hate relationship with this game. This is not a good relationship at all. I love it. It has some great moments. It kind of takes you in as you build your empire. And I also hate it. And it hates me back as well. Before we go too much into this, so it's this kind of game, this genre, which is called 4X, which means explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. Which isn't exactly accurate to what you do in this game. But you know, a set of players are on a map and they have to build their empire based on multiple cities, only one if that's your thing. And as you build your empire, you get exposed to various ways of winning the game, which don't necessarily mean conquering the whole world, but can if you want, or you may win the game by being the first person to launch an expedition to space, or converting everyone to your religion. There's various ways of winning as you expand your empire. And so a lot of this feels really good. I think the whole planning the growth of your civilization and seeing your master plan come to fruition feels good. The mechanics, the baseline mechanics really work. And you can sink in hours and hours as you see things happen and really love it. Plus, there's a lot of variety in what you can do and the way you can approach the game to win. That's also, you know, a great quality that your game has. And plus, you're gonna have to kind of adapt based on what happens, based on what your opponents do, and so on. But, as you realize, I have some amount of criticism, by which I mean a truckload. Let's go, shall we? I have 6 points. All right, number one, the UI, the user interface. I think the user interface is just bad. I don't understand how it can be so bad. It's really bad at conveying information to players, especially new players who don't know quite where to look. Loads of things just don't feel as visible as they should be. There's kind of lots of subscreens which don't work very well. And some of the action happens at a time where the player will naturally be looking at somewhere else. So you'll be missing things. Sometimes the game hides the action behind some screens which pop up, and then you can't even see the action, which is terrible. And what I think is ridiculous is that there are loads of mods which improve this user interface, the way information is displayed. And they make that go from rather bad to okay. But those mods, so reserved for computer players only, not console, of course. But those mods, somehow the fact that it's become standard to add to your game additional material not made by the original developers, that feels flabbergasting to me. It means your game wasn't good enough and that someone else had to fix it. That's insane. That is insane. And I wouldn't play without the standard UI mods. Oh my gosh. Especially extended policy cards. That one is so important. But this is the reality we live in, where someone else fixes your game for you. Also on the topic of user interface and information display, some of the information on your screen is wrong. There's at the top of the screen something telling you how much gold you're making per turn, So in theory, you know, you're seeing plus 500. This is not an advertisement for plus 500, by the way. But if you invest with them, that's great. But if you see plus 500 gold at the top of your screen, you expect that you'll have 500 more gold at the start of the next turn, right? But then if you do some action on the map which modifies this number of gold you'd get per turn, some of those actions won't change the plus 500 to anything else. So obviously it's not up to date. So who knows what it actually is? And there's multiple things like that. There's also the next to a city, there's be a number which says number of turns until the city grows. And sometimes it's just completely wrong. And it bugs out completely if you like harvest a food resource or something like that. You're going to need to click many times on different tiles to fix it. It's how can the same information, it can, but this be displayed differently at two different places? I find this shocking. I find this shocking. But anyway, that's point number one. Point number two is that this game, I'm coming to this as someone who's not particularly experienced with the 4X genre, but I think I have opinions about games and they're still valid. And so this game doesn't know if it's a single player game against an AI, an environment, or if it's a multiplayer competitive game. It doesn't know which one it is. Those two should be quite different. And the result is that it's put in an awkward middle, which works for neither. So multiplayer games are just way too imbalanced. In particular, your starting position, what resources and natural wonders are around your starting position, are hugely important to see how your empire will develop. Because if you're around a place rich with productive resources, you'll be able to build your second city much faster than someone who's not. And even if the other person isn't making it a second city, they'll also be able to build their first city slowly. So you can just by the very start of the game, the very opening coin flip, be screwed out and not be able to win. How bad is that? Very. And kind of like before, there are mods that multiplayer competitive communities use to help with that. And thank goodness for the mods, but how terrible it is that you need mods for your game to be viable in multiplayer. And by viable, I mean fair competitively. Obviously, if you're not into this whole the person who plays best wins mentality, you can have absolutely good fun in multiplayer. Just everyone plays the hand they're given. That's fine. It's fine-ish, except for the fact that every game takes 15 hours. So that's another problem. We'll get there later. So that's the problem with multiplayer. The problem with single player is that the AI, computer-controlled players, they also don't really know if they're players in a competitive game or if they're just people who are part of the world. And it's a bit inconsistent, and that's annoying. So you'll see the AI do moves or have like you, not like you for reasons which are kind of pre-programmed, what's called their agendas. And then sometimes they'll just declare war on you because you're close to winning, which is a great move, and they should do that, but they don't do it nearly as often. In particular, it's very easy to become friends with everyone and then just win the game, and they can't stop you because they don't realize it. On that topic, third point, the AI is the dumbest thing I have ever seen in the history of AIs in video games. I understand that it's really hard to make a good AI for a complicated game where you build your empire with big cities and loads of them. But I had one game where I was on the hardest difficulty setting. I was taking over the whole world. I had a big army, was conquering every single city, and no one built walls. And walls were my counter, because walls are really good counter to a horse-based unit. And I was using many, many horses. I don't get that. That should be something that's programmed in your AI, and you don't need advanced AI to have people realize that if there's someone who's taking over the whole world, you need to build defenses. Offensive buildings. Or at least an army. It's really common to you build a big army and then the AI doesn't have one, so you just roll over them and they roll over and die. It's terrible. Or the other way around, when you have a small army and the AI has a big army, they'll use the worst tactics known to man and just walk all their units one by one into your walls and your archers. And so, even though you have way fewer units, you will win a war, you know, where you're outnumbered 1 to 5 because the AI doesn't plan tactically. Again, there must be some amount of programming you can do which fixes that. Point number 4, which is also a consequence of the AI being terrible. Because since the AI is dumb, balancing it is really difficult because they can't just make a smarter AI for the harder difficulties. So instead, what they've done is give the AI various advantages over the human players based on the difficulty setting. And the result is it's really hard to balance. And essentially, once you're a bit experienced with the game, like I am quite experienced, but not particularly really good. There's essentially 2 difficulty levels: mind-numbingly easy or stupidly and unfairly hard. Just too hard. And whereas the satisfying portion is somewhere in the middle and really hard to access. So what happens, for example, is that on the hardest difficulty setting, called Deity, each AI player starts with 3 cities instead of 1. Not exactly, so they have to settle them over multiple terms, but still, they start with triple your cities and quintuple your army. You have 1 unit, they have 5. So what that means in practice is 2 things. One is you're probably going to run out of space over where you can settle new cities because the AI have taken all the available space by the time you're actually able to get your second city. So you're stuck in a tiny bit of space. You won't be able to grow your empire and you will just have a not fun time. You'll probably be forced to go to war to get some amount of territory for yourself. Even if you don't want to, you'll have to. So that's one thing. Problem, lack of space. That will depend on the map. And number 2 is, well, since the AI has way more army power than you, they are very prone to just declaring war because they're confident enough that they'll win. And that would be fair. In fact, it's not completely unfair, but it's so easy to just die instantly because you spawn a bit too close to an AI player and you don't have enough time to build. As I said, you know, 2 archers can actually destroy a big army, but you need the time to build the 2 archers. So you may, some games you may just die. And you know, other games in deity mode, you'll spawn far away enough from any AI player that you're given plenty of space to develop your cities and so on. And soon you'll realize those games, if you're competent at the game, they'll be easy wins because you can grow as fast as you usually do. And even though the AI gets loads of other bonuses, it doesn't know how to plan cities properly. So you'll eventually catch up and overtake them. So you'll be fine. So, a satisfaction problem. That was point number 4. Point number 5. I swear I should be making a proper list. Unit movement on the map is horrible. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. So each unit, well, most units until later in the game get 2 points of movement per turn. So you can move 2 tiles on the tile-based map. But loads of tiles have features on them which slow down your movement, which means often you can only move 1 tile per turn per unit. And because of the very rigid turn-based nature of this game, if you want to move multiple units, you're going to have to click each of them in order and then click their movement. And don't you dare click at the starting point and then click at the destination, which they'll reach in 20 turns, because the algorithm will bug out in the middle somewhere, where when they get semi-blocked by your other units that you're also moving around, and they'll start taking detours, which will add another 10 turns to your army moving around. It is so annoying to have to micromanage all your tiny units while you're just thinking, I have a big army and I like that and want to enjoy the feeling of power. But no, you just click, 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 one square to the next. It takes forever too. And yes, yes, takes forever. Let's talk about that. Game takes forever. With the decent bit of experience that I have, a standard good game for me would take essentially a day and a half, mostly dedicated to that. Everything is incredibly slow and long. Like a single game would take you 10 hours. That's longer than an Untitled Story. And Stray and Gato Roboto. And Deltarune Chapter 2. For a single round of Civilization 6. If you want to experience a lot of the game, become good at it, it immediately jumps into the multiple hundreds. And there are like modes where things go faster. You kind of develop more per turn, but then the thing isn't balanced properly and unit movement doesn't increase. The consequence is that it shifts the balance and makes military a bit less good, and you can produce your defenses faster relatively to how fast people can attack you. So then you can tweak that with further mods, which is still something wrong with that. And so long, the worst part of the length, the worst part is that every game, I've only played single player versus AI, every game you will know that you've won a solid 2 hours before the game actually lets you win. You know, the moment where you actually fulfill the victory condition. The victory conditions are quite specific, and the game is mostly unable to understand that you've done enough and you will get it in 2 hours. You know, it's fair, it's hard to compute. But that sucks for the player experience. You're going to spend the last 2 turns of the game thinking, well, I've already won, but we need to do this. Keep doing all those things, which in some sense are useless because they won't accomplish anything worthwhile anymore. And I've had many endgames making me just feel bad, like actually hating the process of just slowly grinding at your victory that you know you actually already have, but the game won't let you have yet. And the game makes you, me in particular, makes me feel bad at times, and I hate that. And sometimes it feels great and I love it, but I feel like, so that's, I guess, my last criticism of it. But I feel a lot, there's a lot of just plainly bad design, I think, in terms of the UI, in terms of unit movement, and the AIs. It could be less dumb. But I'm forced to play on the highest difficulty mode because the easier ones essentially are free wins. And I don't just want to play a game with no challenge. Sometimes there's some fun aspect to it. I'll admit there's some fun aspect to it, but I like the challenge. Having something to strive for kind of thing. But I would like proper, more intermediate difficulty somehow. And things be less random based on your starting position. But, you know, way it works, it feels really great. I'll spend days at work thinking of how I'll grow my empire at night when I come back. Probably not great for work. But it's a love-hate relationship. Some great, some really bad. Some really bad, I think, is really objectively bad design. Some of it is just my emotions and what the game brings out. But yes, Civilization 6. I can't really place it in any of those categories. Nothing fits. Nothing makes sense. It's a weird love-hate relationship. As such, I'll put it here. And just call that today here, I guess. I made more on the impact than those. But, seriously, what a game. weird game. And you know, I love it. I'm consuming loads of content, watching YouTubers, reading all the guides in the world, the details of the things and so on. But, finally, at the very tail end of 2022, like started like on 29 December, something like that, I played Blossom Tales, The Sleeping King. That is a bit of a Zelda clone. So move around top down, and you can swipe at things with your sword, you can go around, talk to people, explore the world, fight monsters, go in dungeons. It's very, very cute. It's a very feel-good game. I'll say that. The whole thing just looks nice and is very pleasant. Dungeons are good, the exploration isn't terrible either. I'd say that the physicality of the mechanics are quite shallow. I didn't really like the whole sword slinging. Spin attack in particular is a bit disappointing. The sub-weapons are fine though. But something about the combat just felt a bit shallow. The game itself is a bit, you know, I'd say simple and straightforward. But it's fine, very competent, very well done. Would recommend to anyone who wants to kind of relax on an adventure. That'd be very good. I will put you here. It wasn't exactly... I'd say in some sense it's not for me because it's a bit too simple, but maybe that's pushing it too far. I think I like Gato Roboto more. These three are kind of the same. These three are also kind of the same. There's certainly different categories. But with that, we're done with this list. Woo! So that's the games I played in 2022 and what I thought of them. Various types of thoughts and feelings were had. I thought this was really a game filled... this was a year filled with good games. A lot of them have things I hate or find objectively bad. Combat in FF7, something wrong about it. Item distribution, wide items in Dead Cells doesn't work for me. That's more personal. Civ 6, objectively bad things. But overall, they're still good games. And they would still, like, forgot what the categories were last year. But the B category certainly had games which I wouldn't consider as good as any of those. So, I've been lucky. I've been blessed with good gaming experiences. And for that, I'm grateful. To who? Well, to myself, to game developers, and to friends who've suggested some of those to me, to friends with whom I've shared some of those experiences as well. So, yes, actual gratefulness to actual people. And has anyone watching this video played any of those games? Do you have any interesting thoughts? Put them in the comments. I'd be delighted to hear what you have to say about all of this. But for now, Robin Leonard signing out. I'll see you for the next video. That will be another game. We'll see what that is. I have many plans. Even thinking of playing Civilization 6. That's how much I still like this game. But whatever I come up with will be a mystery. But I would love to see things in the comments. So go ahead and tell me your thoughts and feelings. For now, thanks for watching and bye.